As a nutritionist, I'm interested in the energetic properties of food and their relation to spiritual advancement.
Well, first of all, we need to understand that everything is energy. Absolutely everything in this universe is energy. But not all this energy is pure. This energy that permeates the entire creation, entire matter, from this table that we're sitting at, to the flowers, to the trees outside, to all the objects, animate and inanimate, are permeated with energy. And they are different degrees of energy, so to speak. It's a different degree with which energy is condensed to appear or to become matter. Food is no exception. It is also very important to understand that we live in time where our energy is actually deprived of energy, perhaps to a degree where we have to do something to that food in order to restore or at least balance the original energy that used to be present in our food perhaps thousands and thousands of years ago. Just to give you an example, some of the ancient Eastern spiritual wisdom used to convey a very interesting analogy between the epochs, between the yugas that we live through, and the way we take energy from the outside. For instance, in the golden age, so to speak, very little food is needed because that energy, universal energy, known as prana, was coming into the human being from many approaches. It was coming from literally a descending prana that we were able to receive through the approaches in our cortexes, through breathing, and certain amount of physical energy required for physical action was then complemented in partaking the food. But even then, the food was very different. It was, I believe, radically different from the food we eat today. I don't even think that people needed to eat 3 times a day and snack in between as we do it now. This whole culture that we are now living in, breakfast, lunch, dinner, and drinks and snacks in between, is actually a kind of, I believe, a more recent phenomenon, maybe a couple of 1,000 years old phenomenon. I believe that in much further distant past, the food taking, the partaking in food was on a much more conscious spiritual level, and B, the food itself was so much richer in energy, in prana, that not the amount counted, but the quality, the time when that food was taken, and perhaps even the ritual with which that food was consumed, of which we will talk about, if not in this talk, but in some future presentations, because it's very important the way we eat food. Everything is sacrifice in the universe, absolutely everything. Life is sacrificing itself for other forms of life to be sustained. So we all literally live at the expense of someone or something else. And eating food is not an exception.
Probably even the way that we harvest the food as well in the first place.
No doubt about it. This is a big subject in itself. Since I'm not a nutritionist, and my view is slightly different, I don't actually even believe that by following up a certain routine, a certain sort of table of what kind of nutrients are necessary for an optimal function of the individual, and then again, what is optimal functioning? So we have to delve into that as well. So I will focus mainly on the energetic property of food. And since our food is radically deprived from its original energy, we have to take an utmost care with which we choose our food, where we buy it from, how we prepare it, and how we then sacrifice it into our physical beings. Because this whole process of digestion, as you've heard before probably, like eating is enjoyment, but digesting is divine. I think you even the one who told me about that proverb. And this whole relation of eating and digesting is very important, because through the digestive processes, food eventually reaches the stage when it is becoming a biological essence of consciousness itself, known as ojas. So the essence of everything we eat ultimately has to turn into that essence, into the biological essence of consciousness. So it's like this whole process of creation is then being recreated, if you were, in our body through the progressive stages of digestion, as the food particles go from one basic level, like it goes through different dhatus, ayurvedically speaking, through different bodily tissues, starting from the first one, like lymph plasma, and so it goes blood, fat, muscle, bone marrow, and eventually it becomes the immunological substance known as ojas, that very essence. So the food we eat, if it's deprived and has been played too much with by genetic interfering, by some kind of selecting and breeding process, may become very different from what the nature was intended. And we are forced literally to eat much more food to sustain ourselves. Why? Because the food itself does not carry the required amount of energy it's used to, let alone the interference with which we brutally basically entered the processes of nature. So this is where my attention is of this talk, is that you have to apply utmost care for choosing your food, where it grows, where it's harvested, how long it's been traveled, where has it been preserved, where has it been stored, before it actually comes to your kitchen, where you can lay it out, chop and clean and present it at the table.
And what we actually do every day is to recite a mantra over our food, don't we?
Well,
to raise its energetic properties.
Absolutely.
And it actually does taste better. Food tastes much nicer.
I cannot agree more, because food needs to be purified.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, this prayer, that's what purifies food that has been traversing many hands, that has been subjected to many perhaps different concepts, and some of them perhaps not very pure concepts. So we have to return that food a slight kind of like very subtle purification. It has nothing to do with religiosity. Reciting mantras over preparation of the food actually purifies the subtle essence of food, not its gross physical structure, but just as human body has a subtler pranic kosher, so is the food, everything else in the universe. So reciting the mantras, we're purifying the aura of the food, so to speak, its energetic value. And then praying again before consuming food, before sacrificing that food into our organism, we yet again adjusting, making it even more finer. That's where consciousness recognizes itself through the physiology, on the physiological level, and that act of recognition of what we are about to eat, with consciously accepting that food which is being offered to us through this conscious act, So it's consciousness consuming itself through the act of awareness. And that's the value of the prayer.
So, what is Satvic food?
Well, as has been mentioned in the initial talk with which we kind of opened up this theme, all food that we eat is being governed by the same principles which govern the rest of the events in the universe. So, food belongs to different energetic properties. The rajas, the tamas, and sattva, the primordial energies of nature. Sattvic food is the food that is imbibed with light, balance, equilibrium, and inherent knowledge. That food itself corresponds to the nature of the mind, because our mind is of sattvic nature. When we eat sattvic food, and if we are involved in spiritual practice, we know exactly what's happening. It's much, much easier to stay in balance, it's much easier to meditate, it's much easier to observe one's own thoughts, emotions, and feelings. So, because that food which goes to make our cells brings that quality of consciousness into our cells. So the whole organism, the whole body starts to vibrate with the same kind of quality of energy that is originally inherent in the particular food. We will talk about it perhaps some other time. It's a separate subject, or people can look it up, because there's a vast amount of literature available today on the Ayurvedic principles, where food is being subjected to tables, and you can look at the content, which food is sattvic, which food is rajasic, which food is tamasic. I just want to give an example of some food, like let's say potato. Potato is tamasic and rajasic food, which actually brings the body down. It excites the body and then it brings it down, makes it heavy. But sweet potato is sattvic, so it has a very different opposite effect on the organism. Although I should say that potato and sweet potato are different family. One is nightshade, another one is yam. But that was just an example of how, like, kind of a similar, almost looking, property. Root vegetable, exactly. So what's next then?
Is there a relationship to gunas and doshas?
Yes, this is a good one. I've used to wonder myself in the past when I've studied Ayurveda, and I was very curious, how does this whole relationship works? Is there direct corresponding sort of realities between the primordial energies, the gunas, and the doshas? As we know, the doshas is something that deviated from the purity of nature. Dosha, the word dosha, means something which is no longer pure. Our body consists of 5 elements: ether, air, fire, water, and earth. And in minute combination, that forms doshas. The ether and air is vata, the fire and water is pitta, and water and earth is kapha. Now, how do the doshas relate to gunas? There is no exact correspondence, but however, there is a certain relationship. For instance, food that is predominantly kapagenic, which increases which increases water and earth element in the body, right? That which supports the structure in the physiology. That is usually the food which is heavier energetically, which is usually tamasic food, which slows down the metabolism, slows down the body, slows down the mental processes. Food which usually good for metabolic process, food which is fiery, the pitta food, the quality of food which enhances digestion, agitates the mind. That obviously has direct correlation to Rajaguna, responsible for motion and desire. And likewise, the food which creates the balance in the body, the food which imbibes the cells with light, that food corresponds more to Vata, because Vata is the closest dosha to the prana, because it consists of ether and air. And prana, that permeates everything, like electromagnetism, that is the quality of Vata. It's, the mutability, the changeability. That Vata corresponds to our nervous system. One example, for instance, is that that is completely, how that could be unexpectedly different, is ginger. A fresh ginger root, for instance, acts as heating substance in the food, and yet it's Satvic in nature. So it's unique, and it has a prabhav quality, known in Sanskrit, like a special potency. Because it has a Satvic quality, it's good for your mind, it's good for your digestion, it's good for your immune system. And at the same time, it's heating, it's enlivening, it supports the fire of digestion. Do you see what I'm trying to say?
Yes. You could give examples, couldn't you, of the also of the Prakriti as well?
The individual constitutional setup.
Sure. While you're talking about
Sure. Well, people who studied or have delved into Ayurveda, they would know that we all have a different Prakriti, which is a combination of different doshas. Because we are not just one dosha, we are a combination of three. But one is usually, so to speak, which is our Prakriti, the dosha which is predominantly in our physiology. And there is also a Vikriti, that dosha which comes out of balance more often. The Prakriti is our physiology, it's our nature. And Vikriti is that which comes more often out of balance. And that has to be understood. But that's a subject that people would find for themselves once they delve into Ayurveda. What's important for us here is to acknowledge the fact that food is energy. And we have to be very careful and cautious and conscious to what we eat if we want to progress on spiritual path.
Okay,
because food cannot be taken for granted. Everything we eat either promotes this process or delays and slows us down.